It's hot out there, but let's blow them off the line of scrimmage.
For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory.
For the first time in several years, Metropolitan Stadium in Minnesota was the site of an actual first-place showdown in the NFC Central Division. Usually, the Vikings have pretty much sewed up the division title by the 5th week of the season, but this is not the case in 1976, although the Vikings certainly have kept up their end of the bargain. 2 weeks ago, Minnesota took advantage of the bumbling, stumbling Steelers to run their record to 3 wins and 1 tie. The Purple People Eaters devoured the Pittsburgh offense, capturing half a dozen turnovers and surrendering just 6 points, while on offense, number 44, Chuck Foreman, had his best day rushing as a pro, with 148 yards against the balsa wood curtain. The 17-6 win kept the Vikings in their customary position atop the division, but the Chicago Bears were only a half game behind. The Bears are hard to figure. Chicago began the season with victories over Detroit and San Francisco before Jack Party's Bears somehow found a way to lose to the flightless Falcons 10-0. The next week, however, they made believers of us all when they trounced the Redskins 33-7. In beating Washington, the Bears again looked like the old monsters of the Midway, adding 6 sacks to their league-leading total 23, while allowing only their 32nd point, also best in the NFL. Chicago also has a league leader on offense, number 34, Walter Payton, who had rushed for over 400 yards in the season's first 4 weeks. Payton's running, the passing of Bob Avellini, number 7, and a host of hustling receivers like Brian Bashnagel give the Bears an aggressive offense that matches their defense. Hardy finally put the offense in Avellini's hands in 1975, and Avellini has had a firm grip on it ever since. Whether it's strong enough to challenge the Vikings for division supremacy will be known soon enough, as the surprising Bears meet the standard Vikings for first place in the NFC Central Division. Avellini began the game trying to establish a ground attack, and though he began slowly, Payton, known as Sweetness to his teammates, would rack up 77 yards in the first half. This unique camera angle shows almost the exact view that Payton sees. Not a very pleasant or panoramic view for most of the first quarter. A holding penalty on one early Payton run forced Avellini into a 3rd and throw situation that can be very hazardous against the Viking defense. Early on, Avellini's attempt to establish a running game failed. Fran Tarkenton's would not, as number 44 Chuck Foreman started strong. Foreman's first carry of the game was good for 15 yards, and a look from up top reveals that he got half of that after being hit and knocked off balance. Foreman picked up half of Minnesota's yardage on a 58-yard drive on their first possession of the game and scored the Vikings' go-ahead touchdown from 5 yards out. Balance and an uncanny knack of changing direction are Foreman's trademark. On the touchdown, notice how quickly he darted outside when he saw that his inside route was cut off. The Vikings led 7-0 and soon began to take advantage of an overworked but very real consideration: field position. Number 86 Bear punter Bob Parsons got off a 10-yarder, and though Minnesota would not score on the possession following Parsons' squib, they started a drive from their own 40. Had they gone nowhere, their answering punt would have pinned Chicago deep in its own territory. But even worse for the Bears, Tarkenton began to move the Vikings goalward once more. A pass to Ahmad Rashad and a typical Chuck Foreman run brought the ball to the Chicago 4, as the Vikings seemed certain to take advantage of Parsons' short punt. But on Foreman's foray, the Vikings were detected holding. The penalty would ultimately kill the Minnesota drive, although Tarkenton very nearly overcame a third and passing situation. Rolling right, Tark attempted to hit Rashad, who was open, but the great distance the ball had to travel allowed Doug Plank to recover and bat his pass away. Looking at the play from the end zone camera reveals that Rashad was well open, but Tarkenton's pass was airborne too long. Notice how much distance Plank, number 46, was able to make up before the ball got to Rashad. Though they did not score, a Viking punt from good field position pinned the Bears in their own end as Parsons' poor punt began to haunt Chicago. Number 75, Jeff Seavey, saved the Bears from a damaging turnover on the last play of the first quarter, but early in the second, another poor Parsons punt got Chicago in even deeper. What made matters worse was that Sammy White returned Parsons' 18-yarder 31 yards. The Bears could easily have folded as White brought the ball to the 10-yard line. But a big play by number 76, Ron Rydalch, forced Minnesota to settle for a field goal. And instead of 14-0, the Vikings led 10-0 early in the second quarter. Field position would continue to be the major difference between the two teams as the half wore on. First, Avellini was the middle of a Viking sandwich that caused a flutter ball that Nate Wright returned to the Chicago 35. The Bears again stiffened and kept the Vikings from scoring, but were once more forced to punt from deep in Bear country. Parsons this time hit one for only 19 yards, and Minnesota began its next drive from inside the 50-yard line. Number 60, Wally Chambers, moved Minnesota further away, sacking Tarkenton for -10. And on a repeat of the play, we can see that Chambers' play very nearly got the ball back for Chicago. Tarkenton somehow got the ball back. Then on a 3rd and 20 play, found White for a 39-yard gain to the Chicago 6-yard line. But the Bears hung in, and on a 4th and goal from inside the 1-yard line, Chuck Foreman barely got in for the touchdown. That put Minnesota in front 17-0. The battle for field position was very definitely going Minnesota's way. And another turnover late in the half gave the Vikings possession on the Chicago 41. In the first half, the Vikings had 7 possessions, and not one of them started from inside their own 40. Tarkenton just missed taking advantage of the final field position. Looking at the same play, we can see that White was open, but Tarkenton just didn't have enough zip on his pass, and Craig Clemens got time to recover. All things considered, field position especially, the Bears weren't so bad off, trailing 17-0 at the half. In the second half, the Bears' swarming, mauling defense cut off the legs of the Vikings' running game. They completely neutralized Chuck Foreman, who had so devastated them in the first 30 minutes. So dominant were the Bears that they held the Purple to a paltry 4 first downs over the last 2 periods. Fran Tarkenton's only reliable weapon was tried and true dump-off passes to his backs, especially Brent McClanahan, number 33. This strategy was thought beforehand to be especially effective considering the reckless gambling style of the Chicago defense. But in reality, the check-off passes became a necessity when it was apparent that Fran had no pocket time to set up and properly pick up receivers down deep. So while the Bears' conference-leading defense cold-cocked the Vikings' offense, it was up to quarterback Bob Avellini to plot a course through Minnesota. With Walter Payton as its compass, the Bears marched true north to a touchdown. The holes open for Payton were cavernous, large enough to roll a freight train through. The Bears' line of Antwine, Seavey, Neal, Sorey, and Lick are an underpublicized but sound unit. They rocked Minnesota back on their heels and allowed Payton and running mate Roland Harper, number 35, to freewheel down the field. Another look at Harper's run reveals that Chicago caught linebacker Wally Hilgenberg at the top of the screen on a blitz and ran right at his vacated area. Many times the Bears finessed middle linebacker Jeff Seaman, number 50, in one direction and sent Payton back the other way. But often good gains were earned yard by yard. It was basic bruising football, Chicago Bears football. The end result was an 80-yard, 9-play drive with no passes that culminated in a marvelous Payton cutback and the first Chicago touchdown. Trailing by 10 points, 17-7, the Bears ran headlong into number 70, Jim Marshall, and then into some bad luck. From 49 yards out, Walter Payton demonstrated why he is the lightning rod of the Chicago Bears. It was almost as if the pages of history were peeled back and the number was 40, not 34, and the name was Sayers, not Payton. The run was vintage Sayers, but the results were not. These young Bears have not mellowed and matured yet, and Payton's bit of magic was canceled out by a clipping penalty. But misfortune soon turned into opportunity for Chicago when Chuck Foreman's fumble fell into the hands of number 73 defensive end Mike Hartenstein. It took the Bears only 2 plays to score as Payton on a sweep outran Viking pursuit to the flag. A repeat of the touchdown reveals the one quality that every scout looks for and desires regardless of what sport is involved. That trait is speed, a commodity that is translated into a Joe Morgan steal, a Havlicek fast break, a Guy Lafleur goal, or a Walter Payton touchdown. Touchdowns are never automatic, but extra points usually are. Not against Minnesota, which does the little things to win. Bob Thomas' conversion attempt was spiked by Matt Blair. And now, instead of needing a field goal to tie, the Bears trail by 4, 17-13. In the second half, the Vikings looked anything but the class of the Central Division. Their hallmark is precision, the smooth meshing of offensive and defensive gears. In essence, this means they don't do anything real stupid. Against Chicago, their improvisations harken back to the days when multilaterals were the daily diet of an expansion team, not of a surefire Super Bowl contender. Late in the third quarter, Tarkenton's nickel and dime offense began to pay off. The short pass was there when he needed it, but the home run was not. The only bona fide shot at a touchdown came early in the last period, but 6 points slipped through the fingertips of Chuck Foreman. Minnesota did salvage 3 points on a Fred Cox field goal and led 20-13. The Bears rested Walter Payton and rolled on Roland Harper's second effort running and the infrequent passing of Bob Avellini. The Bears climaxed their 64-yard drive when the lead block of number 20, Mike Adamle, allowed Harper to knife through the underbelly of Minnesota for a touchdown. But that automatic conversion, so overlooked but so vital, was botched again. And instead of earning a tie, the Bears trailed 20-19. Time, over 10 minutes, was on Chicago's side, but the odds of beating the Purple a fourth time was decidedly against them. While number 50, Jeff Seaman, cut off the outside, All-Pro tackle Alan Page, number 88, followed a quick and familiar path that ended at the quarterback. Another look at Page's sack illustrates his awesome speed, which allowed him to beat the block of center Dan Neal, number 52, and reach Avellini from the blind side. While Page has been a resident All-Pro, quick Wally Chambers, number 60 of the Bears, is his heir apparent after 4 years of internship. The Bears received their final break when a Tarkenton pass to Ahmad Rashad, a receiver with wanderlust and a never-changing number and uniform, resulted in a bizarre sequence of events. Rashad's fumble was recovered by Doug Plank, number 46, who dealt it off to number 43, Craig Clemens. It was certainly not Tinker's to Evers to chance, but it certainly was the Bears' last chance. Chicago's last fling at an upset rested on Avellini's ability to decipher the Viking zone, a creation that disguises its intentions with each new play. Minnesota gave up short gains, and with no star receivers of any magnitude and with only 10 seconds left, the Bears fell back on their only formula: give it to Payton and pray. Walter Payton, who rushed for 141 yards on 19 carries, almost pulled off the impossible. The Bears did not lose this game because they cannot or will not pass to ease the burden on their running backs. It all came down to their inability to twice cash in on football's simplest play, the extra point. Instead of winning by 1, 21-20, the Bears lost this disheartening game by 1, 20-19.